So for the daffodil stamens, I'm going to use 28 gauge wire. Now this is going to form the support for the main stem of the flower as well. So we're going to keep these lengths at a third cut. And daffodils, I'm going to make, this is going to have 6 stamens, but it's also going to have a pistil in the middle, okay, which is the center. So you're going to need some CMC or Tylose powder, and a little bit of water. So I've got my cup of water here. That's not how much you need. You don't even need a thimbleful, but I just happen to have my drinking water here, so that is fine. So what I'm going to do is insert the wire into the water to about a maximum of about 1/2 centimetre. And then once I've got it a little bit wet, I mean, the moisture does actually seep up the stem quite quickly. Pop it into your CMC, give it a little twiddle as it comes out, and you'll see it's loaded it a little bit. And then we're going to keep going maybe 2 times. Okay. And then you end up with a little mini stamen like so. And you have a choice here. You could actually simply wait for that to dry and colour it with yellow petal dust, or if you want to give it some texture, then what you can do is use some ground semolina or rice mixed with some lemon yellow dry petal dust. And if we just give that a little shake to get the shade you want, this is just a nice bright yellow for the stamens. I keep these in, these are little glitter pots. You can get them from the card craft shop. If we dunk this a final time, so we've dipped it in water and then the CMC once, we do that again, water, CMC, then we go back to the water, which means that your CMC is wet on there, and then you can dunk that into your pollen, and that's going to give you a really nice stamen. Okay, and that is probably ends up being about just over 1/2 centimetre in length when it's finished. And we're going to make 6 of those, so I'll show you a couple more. So just dunk. It's quite handy if you have everything to hand while you're doing this. So 1/2 centimetre inserted into the water, and then dunk, go back to the water, give it a twist each time so the excess is spun off. And then on the 3rd dip into the water, you can go into your pollen. Just give that a little twiddle. And of course, the fact that the CMC is nice and wet on there, it's acting as the glue to hold your pollen on. So into your water, CMC twiddle, water, give it a spin, CMC, back to the water, give it a spin, and then into your pollen. If you don't want to make up pollen, then you can simply wait for the CMC to dry, and then you can, your stamen to dry, and then you can dust it with your petal dust, which will give it a finer finish. I'm going to show you next. So the pistil, which goes in the center here, is going to be white. So we don't have to put any of the yellow pollen. We're done with the yellow pollen, unless you're making more than 1 flower, in which case you just need 6 stamens per flower. Now this one, I'm going to probably insert it into the water just over 1/2 inch, which is about 2 centimeters. Okay, so, I mean, just make your finger hold where you don't want it to be dunked, because we want some of the CMC to go down the stem. And if you just kind of shake the bottle so that, or the tub of CMC, so that you can get it in on the side there. Okay, give that a bit of a spin, and then go in a second time, but maybe only to about 3/4 of the way. So I'm going to go in, twist, just to spin dry it a bit, go back in. And what will happen is then you'll get this tapered look, because I've only inserted it into the water 2/3 of the way. That's where the CMC is picked up. So you've now got something that is starting to get wider at the tip end, but it stays narrow at the base. And then I'm just going to put just the head in this time, just dip the head into the water, and then dip the head into the CMC, give it a bit of a spin, so you end up with a thicker bit at the end. Now I want to go back in to the water, just the head again, make that slightly bigger, more disc-like, maybe a third time. We don't want it huge, but they've actually got, when you look at some of them, they're flat on the top, and then they're in a bit of a trio of a marking, a miniature version of a lily. When I look at daylilies and I look at daffodils, the petals and the stamens are very similar. And I wouldn't begin to tell you whether or not they are part of the same family, but they could be. So having put extra on the very end there, I can just use my finger to tap that to flatten it slightly. Even though it's only just been dunked into the moisture, it's almost immediately you can handle it because it's becoming a bit jelly-like. If you find though that needs just a little bit of time to go off, then leave it for maybe a minute before you do the next bit. And the next bit is to take your angled tweezers and very, very gently, so I'm going to just support my hand so I can maneuver the tweezers delicately. I just want to take hold of maybe a third of this and just pinch it a little bit so that we're beginning to tease out a trio of blobs, technical term. Now, if it only ends up with one big blob in the middle, then that's absolutely fine. But maybe I can get that just in a position where you can start to see that it is actually dinked into 3 little defined blobs. Don't press too hard because they will end up being pinched off. Okay, so tapping the top to flatten it and then just teasing out so you've got this kind of little trio. I mean, we're going super delicate and super detailed on this. If you were making these very quickly, you could just use standard stamens like seed heads. You could just use 6 for the stamens and one little bull-headed one for the center, and that would be more than adequate. But I wanted to just give you a bit more detail on this one today. Okay, so even if you haven't colored the stamens, you can still assemble ready to be able to put the trumpet on, because these need to be put together before we create the trumpet. So depending on how much stem you want showing would depend on how deep this trumpet is. Okay, now I don't mind that these stick out a little bit, but when you look at them on daffodils, they're probably not gonna, if anything, they're not sticking out, they're more within. Okay, so we can go quite tight with this, or you can just have them so they're just peeking out. This will become a little bit bigger once we've finished working with it, but not so much this way, more widthways, and the frill will make it larger as well. So you can allow, so just use that as your bit of a guide, top to bottom, and where it finishes here, that's roughly where I'm going to tape, which is about 1 centimetre on the stem. There's not a huge amount of stem showing. So I'm just going to bend those a little bit out the way as well, just to help me. And if you find it difficult to handle more than a couple of pieces of wire while you're taping, then tape those 2 together first and then add the others too. So here I've just got a nice stretch piece of Nile green tape. I'm just going to pop that on here to start. I don't want to twist it lots of times because we've got the rest of the stamens to put in. And then if you line these up so that they're all roughly the same height, they can have a little bit of movement, a little bit of height adjustment if you want, some up, slightly down, but overall they're mostly all similar. So there's 2 more going in at the same point. Don't worry if you're not taping in really tightly up here at the moment, because we can always adjust the tape, push it up in a moment. So just bring some more in each time, just bending them a little bit out the way so that you've got control over where it's going and it's not bashing into the others. Don't worry if they're not all perfectly lined up at this stage. So that's all 6 stamens in, but I need my pistil to go in, and the pistil sticks slightly proud. So this I'm just going to slot in at this point in between those last 2 that I popped in. You can see it's slightly higher up. And just from a hands-free point of view, I'm quickly going to tape that so I know it's all okay and together. If I break this off now and making sure that it's still nice and stretched, come back up to the top here and start the taping, holding the tail end of the tape horizontally. And as soon as you've got yourself attached, change the angle of the tape so it's only overlapping it slightly as you come all the way down the stem. Can we tear off or cut off at the bottom? And then using your tweezers, and just be careful because we don't want to take off what we've just created. We can now put these in position. The bend backwards doesn't need to be as strong as it was, but we've got the pistil in the middle, slightly above by maybe 2 mil, and all the stamens equally placed around. And that is your daffodil centre made. So for the trumpet, I'm going to use some yellow. If you were making a narcissi, then you'd be working in orange for the centre and white for your petals. And a lot of daffodils have got darker trumpet and lighter petals, but still yellow. This is my cutter. And I'm just going to roll my paste a little bit thicker than normal, and that way I can make my trumpet a bit more real. You get lots of varieties. Some have got tiny trumpets, others got really big ones compared to the petals. Just make sure your paste is nicely warmed up before you start. And I don't want to make it really, really thick, but I do want some paste to work with. As soon as you put this through the veiner, it's going to make it larger. So I have got something that's probably about 1 millimeter thick rather than phyllo pastry thick. Okay, so it's just got a bit of thickness to it. So then you can line up your cutter, pull the excess from around, keep the excess. It's a lovely yellow. I've used the melon yellow for this. And then we'll drop the shape out. Now, one of the things that's going to make it go large straight away is using the poppy veiner. Excuse the tear, I broke that. So we want to place the shape following the contour. So it's going to go in like this. When I'm looking at the poppy veiner, this is going to give me raised parts, and this is going to give me indented parts. Ooh, I need a bit of corn flour on there. It doesn't matter which way round you put this, because it's the same it's the same shape. So just a bit of corn flour on both sides, pop that in nice and lined up, give it a good old press. We've got no wires in here, so I don't really want to kind of irritate it too much, but you can really press firm, and that's going to give you a bit more size as well. And then it gives you all the texture you need on there, and you can see that's made it larger. Okay. Now, a tricky bit coming up. We need to find something like the back of a paintbrush, a pencil, a piece of dowel, something like that. And we need a little bit of corn flour and your glue. Okay. And what we're going to do is turn this over. So I've got the indented parts. Okay, so I've got more raised texture on the inside of the trumpet. I'm putting my former or back of paintbrush, my pencil, whatever it is you've chosen, in the center there. And then we take some glue and paint the glue, not too much, down one side. Then anything you need, your nail, something to help you just lift up both ends. Balance one side, the unglued side, onto the top of the tool, and then you're going to close over, and the bit you've just glued is should hold. It is the fiddliest. I'll show you the pencil because I can hold it. The paintbrush is slippery. Okay, so I don't want to really heavily overlap it. I'm just giving it maybe about 3 mil of an overlap there. So we press to close. All right, this has got to be the fiddliest part of making the daffodil. It looks quite small at the moment, but that's okay. Okay, so we've got the join here, and I've just puffed a little bit of corn flour on there so that it doesn't stick to my surface. And then you can release that onto your board. I'm just going to change view so that you can see it. We've got the narrowest end we're not going to work on. That's the bit that's going to be attached to the stem that we've made. And now I want to take my cocktail stick, a little bit of corn flour so it doesn't glue itself to the flour. I've taken a bit of the point off of here, okay, and I'm just going to drop that in so it's only going in by about 0.5 centimetre. And we're going to start to press to flare out. Now just be patient with this bit. Keep working on one section and then move the trumpet so that you can work on the next bit. Now, the bit that's going to flare it out will be the part that is becoming wide on the cocktail stick. The reason you've taken the point off, okay, you cut the point off so that it doesn't spike the shape. But you've still got this much narrow, and it's that part there where it becomes the full thickness. That's the bit that touches the edge of your bell shape. Okay. And then you can roll. If you keep rolling and the fat part isn't touching the edge, then of course it's not going to do anything. I prefer to work with 2 fingers pressing. You don't want to go in deeper than that because it's going to end up flaring the whole trumpet, and you just want the edge to be ruffled. If you do want it to be wider, then you can work further in, and then you would come out and go again around the outside edge. So if I wanted this to be bigger, you just make sure that your cocktail stick is going in further. If you happen to have this tool, the silk veining tool, you can use that instead. Sometimes a little bit like a pancake, the first one will break. By the time you've finished, it might be far too dry to work with. With just a bit of patience and time, it will come. It's the trickiest part of the flower. So here we're going over the join. So just be aware that it might be a little bit on the wet side. So add in some corn flour onto your tool. So I've gone all the way around right in, which is making the trumpet bigger. And now I'm just going to come back to that edge and work on flaring the edge out. So remember, where it starts to taper, that's the part of cocktail stick that needs to be placed on the edge. Okay, 1 or 2 fingers. Just keep going backwards and forwards with it until you start to get a bit of a flare. Okay, I'm just going to show you on a different camera angle. Now I'm just looking at that and I feel like I want a little bit more work on this area here. You can, of course, if you prefer, because of the camera view, I can't do this, but if you wanted to, you could actually work off just pop your shape so that it means you can work off the board, and that gives you a bit of leverage because you can tilt the cocktail stick and that will make it a little bit thinner for you. Okay. And you can just try and get that as thin as possible, working on maybe 0.5 centimetre width at a time. Watch out you don't fold one part on top of the other though. Some daffodils super flared, others are not. Some petals are super curly, others are not. Really, I'm sure we will find a variety that fits your flower. Last bit now. It feels a bit uncomfortable using the cocktail stick, but it does give you a good texture. You could use a kebab stick. Okay. So now we have a beautifully flared bell shape. Now, before that dries, I just need to show you how to get that onto your stem. So what we're going to do is quite close, or pretty much where our taping started up here. I'm going to run some glue around, so not too much, but just enough to wet it. Take your bell and feed the back end of the wire through the front of the bell. And just bring it up, and where you've glued, which will be right at the base where the stamens are, you just need to have a little look. Just pinch the very back end. Now, sometimes this closes it up a little bit, so we need to fiddle once we've got this on, but just get your finger in there, pressing gently all the way around there. It's only probably about 3 millimeters of the piece that's going to be attached. And the stamens are looking good in there. Now, sometimes it's not easy, but sometimes it creases. We're trying to go for a fairly bulbous base. So almost where if I press this in, it will fill a hollow void, but it's not very easy to get that all the way around, especially if your stamens are in there. But if you can get maybe the back of a fine paintbrush and just support the base here, and just go in behind the stamens just to encourage the seated part, the bottom part of this, to balloon out. So it doesn't look cone shaped, it more looks like that, like a goblet. Just opening it out. Okay, and my stamens is a bit late now, but they could have done with being a bit more closed up going in. But fiddling at this stage, I can see that I've just damaged that one, so I don't really want to fiddle too much. Okay, so you can see you've got a nice bulbous shape here. I've probably got to do a little bit more work on that section.
Right, okay. Hannah,
Yeah.
The Tinkertech cutter that I've got is much smaller than yours. The cones are absolutely tiny when you roll them together. So I'm starting again, then I think I might have to cut, because obviously then the stamens are too big to go in.
Yeah, I think we could probably do something by hand using that contour. Okay, so I've still got my yellow. If you're working and you're making a narcissi, then your center could be made out of orange, and this would be made out of white. I need my poppy veinner, or if you have it, you could actually use a lily veinner, but personally I prefer to work with the poppy veinner. It just gives me more control. So I just warm my paste up. I've got a ball of about 1.5 centimeters. Roll that into a fat party sausage shape, and then with a bit of corn flour on the largest ridge, pop that out to the bottom. Take your rolling pin, just roll it sideways so you can start to create the width that you need for your cutter, and then we can go ahead and roll up the ridge. Now we are going to roll thin this time. You are going to do some extra work on this after you've textured it. So if you have a bit of thickness to it, that's not so much of a problem, but it is better if it's thin enough so you can start to see the ridge coming through. Peel that off, turn it over. And a little bit of corn flour on the cutter so it doesn't stick. We're just going to line that up centrally. There's no real kind of top and bottom to the cutter, but I always go with the soldered end down the bottom here. Okay, so if there is a kink, it's going to be at the base of the petal. And then you give that good cut, pull the excess round, and while it's still in the cutter, give it a little rub using your finger. Take that out. Now this is the bottom, the soldered end. To help me, if I feel that this is going to be difficult to insert a wire, I can actually cut. Now I know that is the soldered end, but I'm looking at this end. It really doesn't matter. Just thinking it looks a bit less pretty on this side, so I'm just going to take the smallest amount of paste off just to straighten that edge, which makes it much easier for the wire to go through. And then we're ready to threadle a 28 gauge wire that we've cut into thirds. Make sure the wire is nice and straight and you haven't got any kink. If you've got a little cut or a kink created from cutting, then just turn it around and use the other side. So now we're ready to insert our wire. So just hold the ridge on the petal between your finger and thumb, insert the wire into the ridge, and then as you push through, apply a bit of pinching pressure between the finger and the thumb that's holding the petal, and move your finger and thumb so that it's always in line with where the end of the wire is. And I've pushed that through to about here. We want these fairly wide, fairly high up. Then we take the veiner, a little bit of corn flour to stop it from sticking. And with this, when I'm reading the poppy veiner, it says PP. This is going to be the back. So I want the ridge face down on that side. And we're going to turn it at an angle. Now watch out with this because you don't want the texture going sideways. So just follow the lines here up to where it then becomes less fleshy, and just try and position your piece so that the lines are going to go up centrally. And then we press quite firm, but try not to wiggle because you have got a wire that you need to take care of here. So that's going to give you the initial texture. Okay, now you have an option here. You could leave it like that, but if you want to broaden and flare this petal out, it could do with a little bit more work on it. So using your cocktail stick, maybe on the other side of your board, just so that you've got a nice flat unridged area. So just turn that round. Okay, and then using your cocktail stick. So this is the front, the ridge is on the back, so the ridge has got to go face down onto the surface. We're working on the front of the petal, the top of the flower, and you can just pop your cocktail stick in there towards the center and just roll outward and just keep going. That flares and thins and gives more texture. If you have the silk veining tool or a kebab stick, you could use that instead. That will give you a nice amount of texture, but the cocktail stick or kebab stick will be fine. So I'm going just to the center, not over the wire. I don't want to damage the wire. Be careful how much you do because you don't want to end up with lots of anything really wide. Then if you want to give it more, then you can follow the texture that you created on the bell using your cocktail stick. Okay, so here I'm ruffling, but I'm keeping the stick in line with the wire. So I'm not turning it. This gives it all extra movement. Now, one other step, again, it's optional, but I'm just going to drop this onto my foam pad now, and I'm going to use my bone modeling tool. I'm going to use the small end to give it a bit more frill. Corn flour if you think it's going to stick, and just draw along the outline. Okay. The last thing, again, it's optional, is we need to get a central or a double line in the middle here. So all I'm going to do is take the cocktail stick that I've been using and draw just off center, just press down, and then leave a bit of a gap and then draw a second texture line. Now, if you have this tool and you're careful, you can use the sharp end to do the same thing. So it's just giving it just a little bit more movement and texture. Okay, so it's just a double line in the middle. Try and get that so you can actually see it. Okay, so finally we need to shape this. They have got a huge amount of shape, but they do curl backwards a little bit. So we're just going to curl, more curled here, and then close it up a fraction. And we can kind of scrunch it together a little bit as well. I'm going to just create a little tip. When that's in, I'll show you what that looks like. If I just tip this back, you can check your shaping to make sure that you're happy. It's going to sit up and in here. So I think that looks quite nice. I feel like I want to close it a little bit more just to make it look more natural. So to colour the daffodil, you can actually colour it once it's assembled, but also separated, and once it's dry if you prefer as well. So be very careful because this could still be a little bit wet and so therefore quite fragile. I've just got a little bit of lemon yellow petal dust here, and I've got a touch of plum which I might put on the edges. So I'm just going to start with my yellow. Now it's always a good idea to create the base colour so you haven't got to do so much work. So on here, all I'm going to do is just support the trumpet between my fingers and just gently, I'm a bit reluctant to do too much on here, catch from the outside edge inward. So this is just the yellow on its own. And you might find that that is enough. And what you could do potentially is assemble your flower and a colour, and that way you could leave this to dry before you colour as well. It's a little bit wobbly on the stem. I can feel it moving. So I would suggest if that's happening, just leave it alone. Okay, so we've gone from a kind of pale yellow here to just a little bit more yellow on the inside. You can see that there is definitely a tonal difference there. Okay, if I wanted, I could take some of the pink and yellow mixed together and catch the edges again, and that will give it just that little extra pop, but that's going to move and possibly fall apart. So I'm going to leave that to one side for a moment. And then the petals, mostly this is to get rid of the corn flour, but again you can steam them. So just bring the lemon yellow all the way onto the flower, starting on the outside edge, drawing in. And do some work on the back as well. So just support it, just rest it against your finger, making sure that your finger hasn't got lots of dirty petal dust colours on there, because that might transfer. Okay, so it's quite minimal. And if you want to, you could actually take a little bit of your moss green and lemon yellow mixture, just a little lime shade, catch just a little bit. Really, they don't have a lot of colour change, but just a little bit at the base, just to make it a little bit more realistic. So that is the difference here. Okay. Now, just banking the colour idea for a moment, if it's okay, what I might do is just show you how this is put together, because then that way, if you're just watching and you need to go on time, then you can be dismissed. So the first thing you want to do to assemble is just clamp right at the top where your wire goes into the paste, and just bend those shapes backwards. So clamping at the base of the wire and bend back. And once I've assembled this, as I said, I can probably colour it. Sometimes when you're working with intense shading, it's better to have the flower put together so that you can see the whole picture. Sometimes it becomes a bit overpowered with colour because you haven't realised as you've been colouring everything individually. So I'll just get my Nile green tape ready, strip and stretch. And then we take our little trumpet, and we're going to position the first 3 petals behind. So where it starts to cup and narrow, that's where I want to put my petals. So we're going to drop that into place. And then down here, I'm going to put a twisted tape, just so I've got control of the shape, but I don't want to go near this until I have to, just at the last minute. Whoops, did you see that move? Got the next piece in, tape down the bottom here, and then put the 3rd petal in. So they go fairly evenly distributed around. And then tape that one on. Now, at this point, we can break off the tape, come up to the top, make sure your tape's stretched, and then we can tape those 3 in. This one here is a little bit high. Because I've only got 3 petals, I can pull the wires individually and just give them a little tug, gentle tug, and that should pull them down. Just move them as you pull them. Whoops. Just pull the wire out of the way so you know which one's which, and then when you've given them all a tug, you can just put those back into position. So very gently, because again, we've only just made them adjust. And now we're going to go in behind. So quite tight up there again, in between. So petals 4, 5, and 6 will go in behind, but in between the inner petals, like brickwork. So I just go in there and then in here. So you'll notice as well that the taping, I didn't tear it off. I've just started lower down again so that I don't have to crash into that top until I need to. Position your petals where you want them to be, and then come back, tear this off and reposition it at the top. As long as you've got a flap of tape that is long enough to touch itself on the other side, then it should hold. And that way you get a lovely neat finish. Just keep the tape from twisting. And we're going to take this time straightening all these wires so they're not spiraling, we're going to tape all the way down. Now just be aware of, as you twist this, it could weaken the center. And also if you turn the whole flower upside down at this point, that could make the center fall off as well. So just be mindful. We can use something smooth and plasticky to run up and down the stem. That makes it nice and smooth. It takes some of the fold or the wraparound lines away. And the last thing before we put the husk on, just adjust the petals slightly, is we need to turn it, because daffodils don't face the sky, they face the side. So I'm just going to have a look at my daffodil and decide which way to bend. About an inch down, I'm just going to use my finger and thumb as a guide and a press down. So you then make the daffodil face sideways. Going to have a little tilt upwards. And in a minute, I'm just going to show you how to make the husk on the back there to finish off.
So if you make yourself.
Okay, so the this is the autumn leaf piece of paste, and I've only got about 1 centimetre. I probably don't need all of this, but I am going to roll it out nice and thin. And this is like the bit that protects the bud from frost, but it clings to the back of the flower once it flowers. It's quite interesting to see it actually. So make it nice and thin, and you can put that through your poppy veiner just as a random piece. There's no shape to this at the moment. And then once I've got my texture, I'll keep it that way up, and you can use your cocktail stick to just run across there to make it a little bit more textured. It can be quite messy, this. It could even be ripped. And then we want to create a triangle shape. So you can use the scissors or a cutting wheel. So just imagine that that is your flat end there. And then we're going to make it come up to a bit of a point. I'm probably going to cut it there and cut it there. Now I'm looking at this and I'm thinking that actually looks better there, this piece here. So just as a triangle, we'll come to the flower. And remember, you've got to have it slightly bent. And the glue doesn't go on your petals, it goes onto the back here. So onto the bent part of the stem. So I haven't even thinned the edges on this. I'll take that so that the fat end is down towards the stem, and you pop the husk on, just lay it on. It's really weird. And then scrunch it. So you've got this little kind of, I don't know, protected little husk piece. And if you've got a real daffodil in front of you, you'll notice it's on there, but I bet you never noticed that it's there. Okay. And I should imagine that doesn't even need any colouring at all, but if you wanted to, you could actually just put a little bit of your lime green shade. Just be careful, just catch that on the base as it joins the stem. But really it's got a minimal amount of colour. So the last bit is just to show you how to make a long leaf. And the only problem I have with this is inserting a wire. So the leaf can be as large as you like. It's just you need to be able to get a wire through it. The smaller daffodil leaves are more upright, and your larger ones would be flopping over. But you do run the risk of the paste, once it's dry, snapping. So just create, this is just kind of a gooseberry green colour, and I'm just probably 2 centimetre ball of paste, which I'm just rolling into a long strip with a ridge up the centre. And you can either use scissors or your cutting wheel to cut in your shape. You can buy cutters for this, but you can do it by hand. So you just want a daffodil leaf shape. So these would be good for tulips. You can actually buy tulip leaf veiners. They're very expensive, and to be honest, you could probably do it yourself because it's just lines. So we'll go on the other side. Just neaten that up a little bit. If you've got a long pair of scissors, that might be easier. And I'll just come in a bit more here. And if you can manage it, you can insert a 26 gauge wire. This is a half length. But if not, a 28, because often the 26 is poke out. Certainly for me, I have terrible trouble getting these through. But just remember, apply pinching pressure, move your finger and thumb to where the end of the wire is each time. So as you push, adjust your finger and thumb here so it goes further up. Just keep an eye. As soon as you feel that wire might be coming out, it's a bit of cornflour on my hands, stop, pull it back, adjust and carry on. And if your ridge tapers, so becomes slimmer at the top, you're going to be restricted to how far you can push this in. So that's puckered a little bit, so I'm just unraveling it a fraction. And now just going to texture this. I can use my cutting wheel, cocktail stick, or a veining tool. Be careful you don't cut all the way through, but we're going to put a central line in, and then from top to bottom, straight lines. They could be a little bit curved outwards, but ideally just straight. Just keep going with the lines. Ooh, try not to cut through. Try and keep them the full length as well. Missed some here. I have to do some separate shorter ones. And then we can go on to the foam pad. So unless you've got something that will vein the full length, a good thing is sweet corn husk. If you, in the summer, if you buy a sweet corn with the husk on, and then keep some of the husk, cut yourself a nice old long piece, and like when you press flowers, between a couple of pieces of tissue or paper, sit that in a heavy book, and then you can let it dry out, and that will be fantastic if you get 2 pieces for texturing long leaves. Save you some money on veiners. So I'm just thinning the edges, half on, half off with the large end of my bone modeling tool. And then I'm going to close this slightly in the middle and curl back. And I want the top to curl down a little bit more because it's heavy, so it's going to curl over. That's the fragile bit because there's no wire from over here. And this will need some tape. Just down here, start it down the bottom, then you can push it up. And then we're into our lime shade of green. And just give that a little bit of a dusting. You can let that dry and dust it later. This is a little bit on the pale side. I'd probably put some more moss green on there, a little bit on the back. And that could be added. You could put maybe 1 or 2. Woo! Quite low down the stem. I've run out of stem. Just finish off your taping. Just so you can't see wires, because that could be part of a visible stem. And there you've got a leaf with your daffodil.